You don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't know. I may do it. I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do.
Donald Trump keeps the world waiting on whether he will intervene on Israel's side in their conflict with Iran. We will try and work out what on earth is going on in this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and later on in this episode, I'm going to be joined by Steve Rosenberg, who is our Russia editor, for his take on the Israel-Iran conflict, because it's a really good angle to look at this whole situation from. But in terms of the situation as we're recording this episode of Newscast on Wednesday tea time, we've had a statement on Wednesday morning from Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, which was quite fiery, but kind of matching the fieriness of Donald Trump's social media posts that we were reading out in real time in the last episode of Newscast. And we've had some comments from Donald Trump as well, although much more moderate on Wednesday than he was on Tuesday. Plus, there's just been lots of things happening on the ground. So, who better to piece it all together for us? We're making a lot of use of her while she's over here visiting the BBC HQ from Washington, DC. BBC News chief presenter in DC, Caitriona Perry.
Always happy to work on Newscast.
Yeah, just a bit more work than you were maybe expecting. And also we're joined by our colleague Siavash Ardalan, who is from the BBC Persian service. Hello.
I'm glad to be here.
Just explain a bit what the Persian service does before we pick your brains.
So this is the Persian branch of BBC, broadcasting to not just Iran, but to Central Asia, all those basically countries that speak Persian, as well as millions of people in the Iranian diaspora.
And what's it been like for you guys for the last few days?
As you can imagine, extremely busy. The country is at war, so there you go.
Right, I think maybe we'll do today in reverse order, because that'll help to make sense of this complicated situation. So we're recording at 4:30 on Wednesday. Caitriona, the latest thing that's happened is that we've had an appearance by Donald Trump. Just explain what he was actually doing, then we'll talk about what he said.
Yeah, so he came out of the White House. He's erecting a flagpole with a new American flag outside the White House. So he came out with the workers who were erecting this flagpole. As we speak, the flag has not been erected yet. And actually the president made a big deal of not using that word. He said, I won't use the E word because I'll get in trouble for that, which was a curious thing to say. But anyway, we're waiting for the flag to go up the pole. But he came out and spoke to the media, and he started off by talking about cuts to interest rates and the Fed chief. And we have a new nickname now for Jerome Powell, which is Too Late Powell. Right. And the president, spoke about letting him go later in the year. But obviously everybody was waiting to hear what would he say about Iran. That's what all the questions were about. What was he thinking? And he basically said, in more words than this, but I don't know yet. Yeah. And he said, well, I wouldn't be telling you all anyway. Like, this is the time I'm going to strike. This is when I'm going to do it and where, and you can all come and watch.
Well, yeah, let's hear him saying that in his own words.
You don't seriously think I'm going to answer that question? Will you strike the Iranian nuclear component? And what time exactly, sir? Sir, would you strike it? Would you please inform us so we can be there and watch? I mean, you don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't know. I may do it. I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do. I can tell you this, that Iran's got a lot of trouble, and they want to negotiate. And I said, why didn't you negotiate with me before? All this death and destruction. Why didn't you negotiate? I said to the people, why didn't you negotiate with me 2 weeks ago?
I mean, the first thing to say is just that usual thing with Trump of the conflict between the seriousness of the subject matter and his jovial kind of demeanor, something you're just very used to seeing every day.
Yeah, and he was in particularly good form, actually, today. I was talking with a few of my colleagues who were outside with him at the White House there earlier. He was in exceptionally good form, and, he was cracking jokes in between talking about nuclear war, basically. It's quite the juxtaposition, He also said he was speaking to Putin and he'd had a conversation. Putin had offered to mediate with Iran, and President Trump said, no, look, deal with your own war first. We don't need you in the Iran situation.
I mean, he's enjoying himself. You can hear it.
Yeah, but I mean, from President Trump's perspective, and we've talked about this a lot, he's a master commander of the media, of the news cycle, of attention upon himself. And here he is now at the apex of an extremely dangerous situation. And the whole world, I think it's fair to say at this point, is looking to him to see what is the US going to do next. And he is tantalizing, dragging everyone along. I might do this, I might do that. But the sense I got from him was he himself has not yet decided
Yeah.
what he's going to do. And he's hearing counsel from both sides, but is still very much in the middle himself.
So we should actually believe him when he says that.
I think in this case, I mean, maybe I'll be proven wrong in about 5 minutes' time when a Truth Social post drops. But I feel at this point, it's such a big decision, and the advice that he's getting is so conflicted from even within his closest team.
Yeah.
That he is weighing all options.
We'll zoom in on that in a minute because it's very interesting seeing the divisions that are coming out actually in the open amongst Trump's team. Siavash, that little bit of recent history that Trump said there about Iran's willingness to come to the negotiating table over its nuclear program. I mean, how correct was Trump's reading of recent history there?
Well, Iran was negotiating, as far as I can remember, with Trump. Before this, they were scheduled to have another round of talks on Sunday when the Israelis attacked just the day before, and they admitted that this was a deception. So that is not accurate to say that, why didn't they come and talk to me? He kept on repeating that, whereas they were in the middle of a negotiation. In fact, 5 rounds of talks.
And I mean, he's talking about the recent past, but could that also be signaling something about the future, that he's still open to negotiations over the nuclear program?
I think he is. I think he's still following his aim, which was to have Iran basically assure him that it won't be after a nuclear weapon. What became the subject of difference was the issue of enrichment. Iran said that we have to have that right to enrichment, and Donald Trump then decided finally, after prevaricating on whether he is allowing for enrichment or not, finally he came out against it, saying that if you have enrichment, that is the equivalent of an intention to produce a bomb. So that was the sticking point.
Right, Caitriona, let's talk about the divisions. I suppose there's divisions everywhere. There's divisions within the White House by the looks of things. Then there's divisions within the Republican Party. And then there's divisions within the wider kind of like Trump world out in America. What are the two sides?
Well, the two sides are very simply, let's go all in here, American might, American strength, drop these bunker busters and go all in. And the other side of it is, this is not our war. Stay away from it. Let Israel do it by itself. Offer them support to a limit, but let's not involve our people or our kind of unique hardware directly. And they are really bashing up against each other because people are very strong in their beliefs in either camp. There's even a protest planned outside the White House, not our war. You'll have Republicans at that. You'll have Democrats at that. You'll have people from all walks of life at that protest. And within the Republican Party, there's a kind of further fracture, which is some people thinking that you could drop these bunker busters to take out the big nuclear plant at the bottom of a mountain, essentially, just to simplify things, and that would be that Iran would say, oh, okay, we no longer have nuclear capabilities and we'll come to the negotiating table and we'll all be friends again. And then the other side of that is, if you do something like that on sovereign territory using the might of the American military, do you actually think you can walk away from that? And surely that is an act of war on another nation, and you will feel the retaliation of that, which is what Iran has essentially said.
Yeah, and it's been fascinating to watch this play out on social media here in the UK, because so many people have shared that clip of Tucker Carlson interviewing Senator Ted Cruz. So let's have a little listen to the bit that's been popping up on our timelines today.
I don't know the population.
At all?
No, I don't know the population.
You don't know the population of the country you seek to topple?
How many people live in Iran?
92 million.
Okay. Yeah,
How could you not know that?
I don't sit around memorizing population tables.
Well, it's kind of relevant because you're calling for the overthrow of the government.
Why is it relevant whether it's,
because,
it's 90 million or 80 million or 100 million? Why
because
is that
if
relevant?
you don't know anything about the country...
I didn't say I don't know anything about
Okay, what's the ethnic mix of Iran?
And basically that's an isolationist, Tucker Carlson, having an argument with a hawk, Ted Cruz.
Yeah, exactly. And Tucker Carlson, so close to the president, having that viewpoint. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, so close to the president. She's been defending Tucker Carlson because the president has kind of been quite critical of Tucker Carlson's view. He's in the not our war camp. And so you have like these really close Trump people including the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. She has said as recently as March, US intelligence shows that Iran was not as close to having a bomb ready as Israel says it was. I mean, we heard Israel say that at the Security Council on Friday, that they felt Iran was just a few days away from having that capability, which was their justification for going in. And that's the line we're hearing from President Trump. We're hearing that Israeli position. And he's contradicted his own Director of National Intelligence, saying, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about, basically. I know they're just a few days away from a bomb. So, I mean, you can only imagine what the conversations are like in the Situation Room with the National Security Council and all of these advisors when their views are just so polarised.
And we did finally have that meeting, which is the meeting we thought Donald Trump had left the G7 summit in Canada on Monday for.
Exactly, that happened. I mean, we, obviously we're not privy, us mere mortals, to whatever may or may not have been discussed there. But I thought it was interesting in that same commentary when Donald Trump was outside the White House with the flagpole that we played a clip of earlier. He was at pains to say, oh, I had a great time at the G7. We got a lot done, great people there. Because obviously there's been a lot of speculation about him leaving early and what that says for allies and the nature of the conversation. So it was quite like a freewheeling commentary from the president today, but he sort of said a lot at the same time.
Again, just the looking glass world of Donald Trump on a daily basis. Right, Siavash, let's carry on going back through the timeline. And the big thing everyone was looking at on Wednesday morning was this statement from the Supreme Leader of Iran. Just tell us kind of broadly what he said.
Well, basically, he said, we're not going to surrender. That was the main main news line that came out of his speech after Donald Trump yesterday tweeted unconditional surrender. So he said that if the U.S. thinks that they can talk to us in this language, they should know that the great nation of Iran will not surrender and will be unyielding. He wasn't very bombastic, contrary to his previous speeches. He didn't, engage in this, exaggerated rhetoric. What he said was that if the U.S. gets involved in this war, the damage will be irreparable. So he didn't directly threaten the U.S., but it showed that he is concerned about U.S. involvement in the war, and he thinks that might be a game changer compared to the relentless battering that already is getting from Israel. So I think that's where it stood, and we can go into the details of, the tone of his language, what it means, what we can derive, and what we can understand of his mood and attitude and where he stands at the moment.
Well, yeah, let's do that. But first of all, that word he used, irreparable, like what's he getting at there?
Well, it could mean a number of things. I mean, scholars have talked about, what Iran's reaction would be. There have been war games carried out for years in the Pentagon, people playing the role of Iran. What would, you do if you were Iran? And some of it have been correct, some of it hasn't been correct. A lot of people thought Iran's deterrent power, its missile capability is so strong that if Israel attacks it, all hell will break loose. It'll be World War III. And it turns out that, well, Iran's defense was very weak, much weaker than the regime had its own people and had the world and had some of the best scholars in this field believe. And on the other hand, its missile capabilities, yes, it has a very good arsenal, but it's not been as effective, hardly anywhere near the kind of damage that the Israelis have been able to inflict. And that's really upset a lot of Iranians, even pro-regime supporters, who are saying, you put us through the sanction, international isolation, all the hardships that we've endured supposedly was for having a powerful deterrent force, being a major player in the Middle East, with proxies all over the place, fighting our war, leading everyone to believe, that we have this power, that we can project our force. And now, when push comes to shove, you have not really delivered. And it's just we underestimate the level of planning that Israel put into this. I mean, while in this past 10 years, while the Iranians paranoid, a very paranoid, theocratic state, conscious of its, of all the threats, internal threats, was, arresting and repressing civil rights activists, experts, professors, every people who were warning of days like this. They were arresting them on charges of spying and espionage and aiding and abetting the enemy, while the real enemy was inside the country, building drone factories, getting government money under the guise of startups and so on, getting government money to build these factories, supposedly delivering good drones for the government, while at all this time, those factories were gathering data by using sending out these drones, gathering intelligence from Iran's landscape and sending it to the IDF and the Mossad. And now Iran is fighting Israel on its own soil. It's not a war. It's not just bombardments or missile attacks. The Israelis, they have a very active fifth column, like agents, native agents who are working for Israel. And now every day they're confiscating or discovering a house, a mini little factory of drone productions where they send out these drones.
Yeah, I saw some reports today from Iranian intelligence saying that they were identifying some of these sites, these covert sites, and you just think, well, okay, they obviously think that is projecting some strength and some competence, but actually you want to identify the sites 6 days before the attack, not 6 days after the attack.
Absolutely. And there's more than that. These are the car bombs that are going off. The Israelis are sending out these little, these cars loaded with explosive and just blowing them up in front of places where they're targets. So really the country is fighting this on its own soil. It's not the Iraq war where they're withstanding bombardments and precision missile guided attacks. This is a new form of urban warfare with Iranians just all this constantly hearing these drones buzzing above their head. So this is the level of work that Israelis put into this. They infiltrated Iran within the highest echelons of power. Even the head of the intelligence wing of the Revolutionary Guards a few years ago was arrested and convicted of spying for Israel. This is how far into the system they had gone. This startup company that they built, making drones supposedly for Iran itself, it turns out that some of the shareholders and CEOs of that particular company were Iranian hardliners. They let them run that company, so because they're hardliners, to have that kind of immunity while they were doing the real work during these years, over the past 10 years.
Right.
So this is absolutely this kind of war, and this is what Iranians are asking, and that's what they're angry. So you have a bit of this rallying around the flag effect, people, coming together and saying, okay, as much as we don't like our own government, which is repressive and theocratic, and we don't like the Israelis, but how could you expose us to such harm and vulnerability? A country of this population, which is incidentally 86 million,
Senator
against
Cruz,
such a smaller country.
Yeah, but which kind of emotion is winning? I mean, it's a hard thing to answer, but which emotion is winning out? The rallying around the flag and like defending the Iranian nation from the aggressors, or the suspicion and the disillusionment of the Iranian regime?
The pendulum is swinging to the former. In the very first day of the attack, the surprise, shock and awe attack of Israel, which took out 8 high-ranking military commanders, a lot of Iranians were happy. They were just happy that these people were wiped out because there were notorious commanders involved in crackdowns in the previous years against protesters. Remember the Women Life Freedom Movement?
Yeah.
A lot of these people were involved in those crackdowns. So people were happy and saying, well, the revenge was been taken. But then, because a lot of them believed the Israeli narrative, and the Israeli narrative at the time, through its very powerful propaganda arm among Iranian social media users, as cyber things, was that we will only, target nuclear sites and military sites, and that's it. And then they realized, well, war is messy, and it's not just about that. So far, about 500 people, civilian casualties, Iran has suffered. People have left the capital, and it's not just about hitting nuclear sites. So the pendulum is swinging from that sense of euphoria is quickly fading and giving way to a sense of, it's really polarized. You have a lot of the civil society siding, no one's now becoming, if there's a rallying around the flag, it's the true flag, like, it's your country.
As opposed to the government.
Not the government itself. There's no love lost there. But at the same time, you have that group of people who are, not happy with either the government or the Israeli government.
No, you promised you'd give us a bit of an interpretation of how Ayatollah Khamenei appeared with his statement on Wednesday morning. And also, wasn't it delivered in a slightly weird way, and that he wasn't talking on TV? It was the news presenter did it?
At first, it was a news presenter who read out a summary, and then they released a video of his entire speech. It was about 9 minutes. Obviously, he's not in the same place that he used to be. He's been obviously moved somewhere else. Donald Trump has said, "We know
Donald
where
Trump's
you are."
tweet from yesterday is now out of date, potentially. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we don't know. We don't know whether that was psychological warfare or they really know where he is. A lot of people think the Israelis could have taken him out if they really wanted to, because they need someone to sign the surrender deal in which everyone can listen to. That's that's the thinking, but they may not. But wherever he is, he didn't have an auto cue, so he was ad-libbing. It was obvious he was ad-libbing and
Or doing it from memory
doing it maybe
rather than just making it up on the spot.
But he had the time to, first of all, praise that lady, the news presenter of the state TV yesterday, who
When
was
they
under
got
attack
attacked,
and was like, chanting in front of the camera before the bomb hit their studio. He had praised her and thanked the Iranian people for showing steadfastness and this and that. But, the newsworthy line as part of this is, okay, they deceived us. Once again, the U.S., the Americans, we believed them. We once did a nuclear deal with them and then they tore it up. Again, they said, let's do a deal. And in the middle of the talks, they delivered this attack, so they can never be trusted, basically vindicating his own stance. And then he said, yes, he said that the same way we will stand up against an imposed war, we will stand up against imposed peace. So it was a message of defiance. He said President Trump spoke to us in threatening language. Never talk to an Iranian with a threatening language. We don't listen to that, and we will hold fast. So whether he has an accurate assessment of what's going on inside the country, we don't know. Whether he's connected to the reality on the ground, we don't know. Before, he took very hardline stances, and maybe if he knew his own country's capability versus that of Israel, maybe he would have had a different calculus. We don't know whether that continues to exist or not. Either way, he obviously is not going to surrender. He thinks he can hold out. It's a war of attrition. Whether he can hold out, how long he can hold out against this relentless battering, I don't know. But we have to wait and see, really.
Absolutely fascinating. And Caitriona, back to the uncertainty around what Trump will do. You can feel it in there. Everyone is just desperate for an answer that he's not willing to provide and maybe doesn't even have yet, as we were discussing a minute ago. I'm just wondering if there's other people in the American political system trying to actually kind of force his hand a bit. Like, you laid out very well the different arguments that different wings of the Trump world have. But I think, did I read something about some senators trying to pass some legislation that would mean he couldn't bring military action without their approval?
So technically, under the American Constitution, a president cannot declare war, especially in an unprovoked way, without an attack on American soil. Let's say a president cannot declare war in another country without Congress approving it. Now, there's been some legal argument over the years with various things about what that means in a practical sense, but that's what the Constitution says. So what you have is you have two Congress people, a Republican and a Democrat. You've Thomas Massey from Kentucky and Ro Khanna from California, who've tabled yesterday a bipartisan piece of legislation. And they've used very careful language, like restating, reminding the president basically that it's Congress who gets to declare war, not the president. And there's very specific reasons for doing that because, a declaration of war puts the country into a state of war. It gives presidents powers. They can commandeer steel out of factories and, all this kind of stuff, really, that we would have seen like in World War II type of thing. And we've seen the president try and say that he's in a war over immigration and get extra powers over that. So it's quite a technical thing. But anyway,
the tariffs were a national security thing that got challenged in court.
Yeah, so in this instance, so you have this bipartisan piece of legislation going through the House. In the meantime, you have Senator Tim Kaine, who people will remember as Hillary Clinton's running mate. He's tabled a piece of legislation through the Senate as well. There will be bipartisan support for that because, as we were saying earlier, this split within the Republican Party. So you have these pieces of legislation that will progress. They're totally designed to just remind the president that you do not get to do this. But of course, in the real world where we all live in, right, there's a political declaration of war and then there's dropping a bomb
because
somewhere.
to me that sounds slightly like displacement activity while we're waiting to find out what Trump actually was going to do.
Yeah, basically. And it's just a way of reminding him the run of things. But as we know time and time again from President Trump, that he does things his way. And he said today, I know what I'm doing, I know best kind of thing. So, again, we're waiting with bated breath as to what this one individual is going to decide.
And while we've been chatting, the UK government's been having one of their Cobra meetings in the basement in the Cabinet Office in Whitehall. And we haven't heard anything about it yet as we're finishing this conversation. But I imagine these meetings, as much as we think they're about like grand political and geopolitical strategy and security, quite often it ends up being about evacuating British nationals from places where they're at risk. And it's not war or peace. It's actually just
practical
logistics
stuff.
Yeah.
And you can be sure they're also hovering over Truth Social to see if any post comes up while they're in their bunker having that
clicking
meeting.
refresh in the bunker. Yeah.
How's the Wi-Fi signal down here?
Yeah. Right, Caitriona, thank you very much.
Thank you, as always.
And Siavash, thanks for coming in.
Glad to be here.
Now, as promised, here is the conversation I had with the BBC Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg. He is in not Moscow, but St Petersburg for a big economics conference, but an economics conference that has terrible Wi-Fi. So my conversation with him was captured through the technology of telephone. Hi, Steve.
Hello, Adam.
So before we talk about the geopolitics, you're at this economic summit in St Petersburg. What's that all about?
Yes, it happens every year. It's the St Petersburg International Economic Forum, SPIEF. And in times gone by, they used to sort of dub it Russia's Davos. No kind of Swiss mountains here, no ski resorts. But, you still have this stunning setting of St Petersburg, beautiful city, the Venice of the North. But in recent years, that kind of label has worn off a bit because you won't find here many CEOs from, big Western companies. They've kind of stayed away in the last few years, particularly since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And it's quite an odd event. I mean, we were going around today, all kinds of strange robots and some very weird stands. There was some boxing going on. It's a strange mixture. In one sense, Russia tries to showcase the economy it has and some of the innovations it has, a lot about AI here and stuff like that. But in other senses, it's sort of looking back. And of course, even though it's an economic forum, geopolitics is in the air. It hangs in the air here. You can't get away from it. And so, we're expecting Vladimir Putin to make some comments tonight. He'll make a big keynote speech on Friday, and we'll be looking out for anything he says about, obviously, the situation in the Middle East, Iran, Israel, also the war in Ukraine, relations with the United States, things like that.
And in the meantime, you've written an excellent piece for the BBC News website analysing Russian reaction to what's been happening with Israel and Iran. And it seems to me that there was an early reaction and then a slightly more mature analysis of what the situation could mean for Russia. What do you want to just sort of delineate the two stages?
I think that's right, Adam. I think, obviously, when the Israeli strikes began at the end of last week, Russia came out and said this is dangerous, this is alarming. But reading the Russian papers the next few days, they were sort of looking for pluses, the advantages for Moscow here. For example, some of the commentators here were talking about, well, oil prices are going to go higher, or have gone higher, and that's going to be good news for Russia, which exports oil. Other people were saying, well, this is going to distract the attention of the world from the so-called special military operation, in other words, Russia's war in Ukraine, because America will be so focused on what is happening in the Middle East that it will forget Ukraine. In fact, Kiev forgotten was one of the big headlines in one of the pro-Kremlin papers. So there was this sort of element of, well, it's going to be okay for us. And then I think the penny dropped, and the sense that this is escalating and escalating, and with the words regime change sort of in the air, Russia already lost a key ally in the Middle East in the last 6 months. That was President Assad in Syria, right, who was deposed. And fled to Moscow. The last thing they want is to lose another key ally, the Iranian leadership. And so there is concern. And also, we've heard today Russian officials saying the situation is very serious, warning America against military assistance for Israel. So, there is a sense here that the Russians are realizing the urgency and the seriousness of the situation.
Interesting that there's some kinds of global instability that Russia likes, but then other kinds that are beyond the pale, even for the Kremlin.
Yeah, it's a very good point. The thing is that a few days ago, the Russian Foreign Ministry issued a statement condemning Israeli strikes on peaceful cities sleeping at night. And then, of course, this is from a country which for the last 3 and a bit years, has been attacking a sovereign country, its neighbor Ukraine, a member of the UN, So yes, it's one rule for one country, one rule for another.
And would Tehran have been expecting some kind of assistance from Moscow in this situation? And equally, does Tehran provide any assistance to Moscow for the situations Russia faces?
Well, Russia and Iran are close allies. There's no doubt about it. And in fact, a few months ago, President Putin signed a comprehensive strategic partnership agreement with Tehran. But when you look at the small print there's nothing about Russia having to come to the aid of Iran if Iran gets attacked. There's no sort of mutual defense obligations in that pact, in that agreement. It's not a military alliance. And that's why we haven't seen any sort of military support going Iran's way, right? But, I said these countries were very close and they have cooperated. So when Russia's war in Ukraine began, Iran was providing kamikaze drones to the Russian army to help Russia's war effort there.
But from what you were saying, that sounds like that was almost like a good business for Iran, as opposed to some kind of broader security pact that the two have. That was almost like a trade. It just happens to be in military equipment.
Yeah, I think so. I think the other thing you hear from Russian officials is we have decent relations with both Tehran, both Iran and Israel, and Russia continues to suggest that it could mediate in this crisis, that it has the relationship with both the parties involved to try to de-escalate things. But of course, when you look at what Donald Trump has been saying and what he's been posting on social media, it doesn't sound as if at this moment he's that interested in the idea of Russian mediation. I mean, he's called, hasn't he, Donald Trump, for Iran's complete surrender. So it's a very difficult situation. It's a dangerous situation. I managed to catch in the lobby here Kirill Dmitriev, who is President Putin's envoy, who's been negotiating with the Americans, and I asked him about Iran and how concerned he was about the situation, and the fact that Russia had already lost one big ally in the region, doesn't want to lose a second. And he said dialogue. That was his big message. We have to keep talking. We need dialogue to kind of resolve this. Yeah.
And on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, I'm loath to say, has there been any progress in the negotiations? Because progress and negotiations don't kind of seem like the two words that people really use to discuss that situation. But is there an update for where we've got to on that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I was in Istanbul a few weeks ago, right, for the first round of talks, of so-called peace talks, direct talks between Russia and Ukraine, and they didn't lead to anything apart from a prisoner exchange. And to be quite honest, we're not much further. There's still no sign of Russia making any compromise or any concessions. Certainly, Russia continuing to refuse to sign up to what America had asked for back in March, a 30-day comprehensive unconditional ceasefire. The Russians don't want to do that. They're pushing on with their operation. Their argument is that if they go for a big ceasefire, they claim that Ukraine will use that to rearm and prepare to resume the conflict. But of course, critics of Russia say, well, this is just proof that Moscow wants to continue the war.
And then just to end where we started with you talking about the Davos-style economic forum that you're at. I mean, how is the Russian economy at the moment? And because it's sort of in a few months ago, people were talking about actually it's booming because of the war in Ukraine. And so anyone on the anti-Russian side thinking, oh, there could be an economic solution to this to apply pressure on Russia via kind of like the pockets and wallets of ordinary Russians, that was kind of a bit optimistic. How does the Russian economy feel at the moment?
Well, it certainly wasn't booming. I mean, it was growing. There was economic growth here, which was pushed by the war. There's no doubt about it. The Russian authorities pouring money into military industries, and that was fueling economic growth here. But that's kind of petering out now. And actually, the list of economic problems that Russia faces it really gets bigger by the day. And what's interesting is that when you read the Russian newspapers here, in a very controlled media landscape, they talk almost every day about the economic problems. Inflation is still very high, about 10%. Interest rates are very high. They were 21%. They've been brought down to 20%. That's still very high. Puts a lot of pressure on people and on businesses. And if you look at industry, a lot of branches of Russian industry are going into, well, the papers talk about recession. So there are big problems here that the government needs to work out.
Interesting. And Steve, I should say, because the internet connectivity isn't great at the venue you're in, we're speaking to you on the phone. So it sort of feels like I'm speaking to you on a landline in about 1992. How's Mr. Gorbachev getting on?
A blast from the past, isn't it? It's funny, isn't it, Adam? Because walking around this forum here and all these stands, there's a lot about the future, a lot of bright lights, a lot about AI, and yet I can't get a decent line out. Never mind. At least I managed to speak to you somehow.
Don't worry, me in East London, if I was doing this from home, would be exactly the same. So I'm not sure how revelatory that is. But Steve, thank you for revealing lots of other stuff.
Take care, Adam.